Yes, indeed, life is all about joy. Life is all about pain. Life is about to get good. And life indeed is good. We thank the good Lord for another good day. Morning has broken and you bang on time for AM Live Breakfast Show. Of course, today is Wednesday, and every Wednesday we have this panelist that they're always here to tell us about matter security. We analyze what is happening in Kenya, in the region, and entire world, just taking a panoramic view of the security issues surrounding the world right now. With us this morning is Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who is a former Deputy Chair of the African Union. Also, we do have with us as well Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is a conflict and a resolution expert and also a national security analyst here with us. We're eagerly waiting for other panelists to join us this morning. And of course, we'll be looking at what has happened in South Sudan, the peace deal. How fragile is it? Also, in Zimbabwe, they've just concluded their election. Very, very contentious one for that matter. And of course, we try and see how also a Kenyan was embroiled there. The former aide of the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, that is Sakakaja Kakakimba, if I may get the name right. That is a person that also is wanted, and because of the skirmishes that were in Zimbabwe. In Mali as well, election was there, a very contentious one for that matter. And we try and see the also resumption of all the sanctions in Iran. It's all about the US and Iran nuclear deal. It is getting murkier and murkier by the day. Today we put all these issues into perspective. But before we drill deeper, as always, we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly in our dailies. This is what is fresh off the press this morning. On the front page of a Daily Nation, teachers split over Sosion strike plan. That is what you're waking up to today. And it says NAT has declared what it terms policy war on employer over transfers. Corporate dismisses call for September industrial action as unnecessary and likely to interfere with the learning. Instead launches negotiations with TSC to resolve dispute over performance appraisal and mass transfers. You have the story continuing on page 3 of a Daily Nation today, and you can see a related picture here. President Uhuru Kenyatta meets the Deputy President of African Confederation of Principals in the Mulek High as his boss, Mr. Temekile Ndlovu Luxon. Yesterday, the head of state officially opened the African Head of Schools Conference at Pride Inn Hotel in Mombasa. You can follow this story also on page 3 of the Daily Nation today. I have a sad story. More houses demolished in crackdown, and this is all still on the front page of a Daily Nation. Perimeter walls, security fences, swimming pools and gardens were yesterday knocked down as agencies tasked with cleaning up Nairobi River and its environs continued clearing riparian land. The operation was overseen by demolition squads drawn from the NYS, Nairobi County and the Environment Authority. That story continues on page 21 of the Daily Nation. Now, how police tracked down terror gang. One blunder happened as a Toyota Dyna truck carrying a bomb towards the US Embassy left New Rwanda, I should say, and snaked through the city traffic. It will later help track down the Al-Qaeda killers. The ringleader, Mohammed Fazul, had noticed that the jacket worn by the Afghanistan-trained suicide bomber Rashid Dawood al-Wahali was concealing the pistol. You have this story on page 10, and this is all about the August the 7th, 1998 bomb blast. That is all well fleshed out for you. Of course, yesterday was the 20th anniversary, and that story is well tucked away on page 10 of the Daily Nation today. Also, we shall be looking at that with our panelists today, hacking back, of course, from that particular incident until today. What security measures, what lessons have we learned so far? And as far as the counter-terrorism strategy is concerned, also we'll drill deeper on that later with our panelist. On the front page of the Standard, Uhuru lifestyle audit process now gets hotter. It says tough condition, scope of wealth declaration for civil servants widened, new orders targets contracts for goods and services, consultancies, sponsorship by firms including overseas trips, and plan for future employment. Also disclosures designed to expose potential conflict of interest. Also, civil servants had until last Friday to furnish the Public Service Commission with vital information. It is being interpreted as an extension of the ongoing lifestyle audit. That is what we have as a splash today on the front page of the Standard this morning. Also down it comes, high cost of building on repairing land. This is how it looks. This is still ongoing. It's all about demolition. That is what we have on the front page of the Standard. Jubilee leaders accuse Raila of rocking party. That is what we have also on the front page of the Standard. Parties challenge ODM in Migori Senate mini poll. Doctors police deny stealing body parts is another story that you want to follow on page 19 of the Standard. Let's see what we have on the front page of the Star. Muhoro, it says, headed killer squad. That is what Ahmed Nasir is saying. MPs ignore damning dossier for senior lawyer to support former DCI's nomination. This story is tucked away on page 4 and 5 of the Star today. Committee endorses all envoy nominees submitted by President despite queries. Muhoro headed killer squad. You can follow that story inside the Star today. Also somber moments as Kenyans mark 20 years since August 7 bomb. You can see here the aftermath of the US Embassy bombing in Nairobi on August 7th, 1998. And right, we can see also 80-year-old Margaret Acheng praying at the plague bearing names. Actually should be the plague. Not the plague bearing names of those who died, including her daughter. And it goes on to say Doreen Akwach during the 20th commemoration of a terrorist attack that killed 224 people. That is a story that you want to follow also inside the Star. Kileleshwa owners watch as houses are demolished, stay at the cost or raised speculation, says Uhuru. And also Jirongo faces arrest over failure to pay 25 million shillings. Kijabe villagers mull over appeals for rampaging monkeys. Right. That is the story you want to follow on page 3 of the Star. Let's see what we have on the front page of Taifa Leo. Waziri Rais atuliza joto. It says Uhuru asema alilazimika kukatiza ziara yake pwani kufuata uvumi anaandaa mabadiliko serikalini. That story continues on page 2 of Taifa Leo. We have also the Business Daily today. Collimore's 196 million shillings pay shines a light on Cooperative Bank and KCB. Safaricom CEO's salary rekindles debate on remuneration policies of less profitable firms with blotted executive pay. And it continues to say that Kenya's largest and most profitable company, Safaricom, has disclosed that it paid its chief executive, Bob Collymore, 196.5 million shillings in the year ended March, shining a light on two banks that paid their bosses much more for running much smaller and less profitable businesses. Safaricom says in its annual report for the year ended March 2018 that Mr. Collymore took home 94.32 million shillings in basic salary, a bonus of 3.42 million shillings, non-cash benefits of 35.64 million shillings, and a Vodafone UK share award. That story continues on page 4. And of course, this is in light of the Capital Markets Authority. We know that is the corporate codes that the CEO or companies, they have to disclose the salaries of their CEOs, or yes, the companies have to disclose the salaries of their CEOs, and this has been happening since last year. And of course, this is development. So are there any punitive measures if you paid a huge chunk of money, yet the company is really going down the tubes as far as the P&L bottom line is concerned? That is what you have to follow also inside the Business Daily today. Sale of Karume's iconic hotel sparks fresh row. It says a bruising battle is brewing between trustees of the late Jenga Karume's estate and his children after one of the former minister's prime property was put up for sale. You can follow that story on page 4 of the Business Daily today. I want to show you also what we do have. Oops, it's just spilled over to page 2. Treasury says MPs approved law on early levying of taxes. Parliament reviewed. Let me try and zoom in a bit for you to see. Parliament reviewed and approved the legal notice that brought into force segments of the Finance Bill 2018 that introduced taxes, which were later suspended by the High Court Treasury Principal Secretary Kamau Duge has said. Dr. Duge, in his response to the ongoing court case, says the legal notice was submitted to the National Assembly on June the 26th and properly assumed the force of law. You can follow the rest of the story on page 4 of the Business Daily. Let me show you what we have across the region. We begin in Tanzania. Kenyan court frees ivory kingpin seized in Tanzania. Judges overturned 20-year jail term handed to Faisal Ali, who was arrested in Tanzania in 2014 and extradited to Kenya. That story continues on page 2. And a bit of a background. It says Interpol said in December 2014 that Mr. Faisal Mohammed Ali was traced to Tanzania following a warrant of arrest issued against him 2 months earlier. The agency had posted his picture and details on his websites, or on its website, I should say. Interpol added that Ali, the leader of an international poaching syndicate in the region, was linked with the seizure of 228 tusks and 74 ivory pieces weighing over 2 tons. That is a story that you will follow inside the Citizen in Tanzania. Upskills of negotiators, says Global Firm. Upskills of negotiators, says Global Firm. And Tanzania, US mark 20th anniversary of embassy bombing. Also, that was happening in Tanzania. This was a twin bomb here in Kenya and Tanzania. And we can see here Home Affairs Minister Kangi Lugola and Acting US Ambassador Inmi Patterson laying a wreath at the monument commemorating victims of a US embassy bombing in Dar es Salaam on August 7th, 1998. Yesterday's solemn ceremony at the National Museum in Dar es Salaam, marking the 20th anniversary of the attack, was attended by relatives of those killed in the blast, survivors, government officials, diplomats, and members of the public. You can follow that story inside the Citizen in Tanzania. TCRA threatens to suspend DSTV license. That is another story. Still there in Tanzania. CCM, it says, waandamana kumpinga bunge aliyeitosa Chadema. That story continues on page 4 in Tanzania. And the East African, I want to show you the latest from Hoima to Tanga. Who will build the new pipeline? That is their abiding question. Front runners, Australia's Wally Parsons and London's Penspen lead the pack. You have the full report on page 5 of the East African. Has Zimbabwe really changed? When the chips were down, ZANU-PF and MDC, both parties resorted to familiar old tactics. You know the drill. And that story continues on page 13. Kenya's plan for its limping farms also is another story. Kenya plans a special trading platform for trouble-listed firms as it emerges that immediate delisting of such firms could create a crisis of confidence in the capital markets and send the wrong signal to potential investors. You have the story continuing on page 46 of the East African. Editorial cartoons quickly. Let's see what we have there for us today in the Daily Nation. This is what Munene has drawn for us. British Lord resigns from Parliament after arriving late. Japanese officials burst into tears as he apologizes for wasting public money. This is what happens in other countries. South Korea and Brazil president jailed for corruption. But in Kenya, we have the news. Chinese senior general communist suicide under corruption investigation. Of course, that is in China. But in Kenya, Kenyan CS addresses public over Rhino's death. He says, go to hell. Again, Kenyan graft lords rotting in jail. While you can see their jail. And these are posy of goons, of course. This is depicting what is happening with other jurisdictions as far as corruption is concerned. Right now, also, we know that the former vice president of Argentina, he's been sentenced to 5-year jail term. Also, in Malaysia as well, we have the former prime minister who has been jailed. But what is happening in Africa? What is happening in Kenya? That is what has been aptly captured here by Munene. Let's see what we have today in also the People Daily, right? 1998 blast victims. What happened to the compensation of these victims? We saw many of them yesterday crying foul about the slow uptake of reaction from government as far as compensation is concerned. Let's see also what we do have in the Star. And this is what has been drawn by Victor today. South Sudan power sharing deal. You know the drill right now. Okay, the switch is on as far as Kir is concerned. I leave it for you to decipher this, but you can see that plug of Riek Machar has been, unplugged. That particular, yes, that particular, what do you call it? The plug, yes, it has been unplugged there, but Salva Kiir is on. I leave it for you to decipher, and maybe also some of our panelists will tell us on what they think about this particular editorial cartoon. Irongo Hilton, when you see Salva Kiir, the particular new South Sudan deal, what do you decipher from this particular editorial cartoon?
Giving them more energy, because they have apparently, I don't think they have much energy to go on.
They don't have much energy.
Yeah, so one is given, and then the other one perhaps will be given some energies.
So they will be swapping.
They'll be swapping. That's why it's important to have new leaders with fresh energy.
Okay, so we only have one socket here.
Yeah, there's only one socket. Machar's plug is out now.
One plug, yeah. So we have Kiir's, which is on. So they will unplug. So what happens to Machar himself?
What I see there is kind of musical chairs to some extent. So it seems like these are interchangeable connecting devices, if you can use the digital term. One concern, I think, is really that, young blood, young leadership no longer, seems to be part of the equation of a power sharing deal. And I think for many of us who are watching South Sudan, one of our concerns is that many laws are still on the statute book that allow for people to be detained without trial, including our own panelist, Peter Biera-Jack.
Yes. And of course, later you shall be giving us also some of the developments of what is really happening with Peter Biera-Jack, who is still in the slums in South Sudan. When you look at this, Erastus Moincha, are you electrified?
I'm trying to understand this. The two are watching. Are those neighbors, perhaps? And are they the ones who have got the hand on the electrical pole? If they switch off, then the two will die.
Yeah, so that is, of course, M7 and Antoinette. Antoinette and all. You know the Antoinette here in the country. Yes. So they are the people now who are controlling the switch. So they will flick it on and flick it off.
Yeah.
What does that really, are they really been, or really, they're really backed in the cake as far as this peace process is concerned in South Sudan?
In the previous agreement, at least the president argued that he was forced to sign it.
He was forced to sign it?
The last agreement in 2015. Okay. This time he says it was consensual.
All right, fantastic. Let's hear from Momo Nzao. Good to see you after a long while.
Very well, thank you, Debarl. It points probably to the fact that the regionalization of issues that are internal to a country. It looks as though there is much that the region and things that are external to South Sudan have to do with what is going on in there. So it's both positive and somewhat negative that people have to be sort of pushed by the region to do what is right and so on.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Naomi Damba.
Debarl, from where I stand, the jury is still out. Will these people begin now to know that they are elected by the people, and it is the people that expect them to be there? Will they change their mind about fighting each other and worry about the future of the country?
And worry about the future of the country?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure? No. Thank you. That is in the Star. Let's just see what also Gado has for us today. And this is what also a ticklish issue also in Turkana right now, as far as oil is concerned. The impasse that is there, and everything now has gone to a halt as far as the process is concerned of transporting the oil to Mombasa. But Oil Inc., this is how it goes with devolution, right? We have these people, the investors, and the national government will get their cuts. Of course, that will be passed over to the national government, or the governor. That is the national government. Then we have the county, and finally to Wanjiko. And of course, the whole process has been murkier as far as the locals also understanding that this particular money is not meant to really go to their accounts, because they say we want to see the money, transferred to accounts. That's the, the direct benefit from the oil. I think that also we need to get the perspective right as far as the revenue sharing is concerned with the oil as well. And this is what has been captured by Gado this morning. So I think also that can be a very good point of discussion as well this morning. But Basically, those are the dailies this morning. You can grab a copy of the Daily Nation, the Star, the Standard, whichever paper, as always, we say, that really floats your boat, right? So we want to see also what we have for you this morning in our news bulletin, and we begin with a very good story about an accident where 4 people, including a pedestrian matatu driver, a mother and a child, died on the spot, while 6 others are in critical condition following an accident along Naivasha-Nakuru Highway at Delemai area last evening. The accident involved a 14-seater passenger service vehicle from Nyamakima, Sako, and a trailer, according to truck driver Joseph Munyao, who was headed for Nairobi. A pedestrian who was standing by the road suddenly jumped onto the road, and as a truck driver tried to evade the pedestrian by steering towards the middle of the highway, he rammed the oncoming 14-seater PSV. The truck hit and killed the pedestrian who had jumped into the road, triggering the chain of events. The injured are at Naivasha Sub-County Referral Hospital.
Nikapata mtu amesimama kando. Ule mtu nimekuangalia mawazo, sikujua amefikiria nini. Nikaona yani nikiwa almost 20 hata ni kama centimeters. Ule mtu akanjirusha kwa trailer.
Ajali kifanyika, kuna venye huyo jamaa alikuwa anatoka na hii side. Amekuja hivi ndo akapatana na hiyo transit kumgonga. Ndo ika lose control, alafu kapatana na hiyo nisi.
And Parliament has faulted the Ministry of Education for failing to enforce travel regulations on schools trips, saying the inaction may have contributed to the accident that claimed the lives of 10 students of St. Gabriel's boarding primary school. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Education has directed all institutions to comply strictly with the existing regulations governing transportation of learners, saying that firm action will be taken against managers whose schools flout the regulations.
I'm sure there is somebody in the Ministry of Education that is sleeping on the job, and that is why this rule has been left to die.
The closest secondary school to you, the closest police station which can guide you to a secondary school, let the children go and spend the night.
Even if at that particular hospital, the level 4 hospital was working, some of the kids would have been saved. However, it is unfortunate to be informed that an hospital at that particular level even lacked a trauma center.
These are children who are never sick at all. These are families, they were not sick, but the cruel hand of death took them away in that a terrible way.
And up to 20 amendments have been made in the sugar report that will be debated in the National Assembly today, amid reports that a section of MPs are plotting to dismiss it. Kimilile MP Didmas Baraza claims that he has collected 96 signatures from legislators in order to start an impeachment process against Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, who is among 3 cabinet secretaries implicated in the sugar report.
I have members of parliament from Jubilee who have signed. Members of parliament from coalition parties of the Reforms Up NASA who have signed my petition, including independent members of parliament.
Now, the hearing of the NYS case involving former NYS Director General Richard Ndubai and former Youth Affairs Principal Secretary Lilian Omolo, among 48 other suspects who face corruption-related charges, will commence in October this year. The trial court and the Chief Magistrate Douglas Ogoti has set rules and guidelines to be adhered to during the trial of the cases. Advocates representing the accused persons have been directed not to withdraw from the case during the hearing, adding that no adjournments will be entertained by the court. The magistrate also said that the court will not accept any application for adjournments. The court further directed the accused persons, together with their advocates, to make sure that they will have all the witness statements and documents that the prosecution will intend to use during the hearing. Subsequently, I should say, the accused persons are not required to report at this year, as earlier directed by the court. This is after the court vacated the said order following the setting of the hearing dates.
All accused to ensure that they have with them all statements and copies of the exhibits in any case. You know, we are alert to the fact that you may differ with your clients, so the clients should also be aware. The parties are encouraged to plea bargain, and such plea bargaining will not lead to adjournment of the cases. The court will adopt a properly executed plea bargaining agreement at any stage before judgment is delivered.
Now, governors want the Commission for Revenue Allocation to review parameters it is using to disburse monies to counties, as the ones it is proposing will disadvantage others. They also want the monies shared to counties to be pegged on the current collections by the national government and not on the 2013-2014 financial year as it is now.
We feel that those parameters are too many to create a proper impact to the counties. And we feel that 4 important parameters that will have impact on the development of the counties are the population, equal share, poverty, and land area.
The vertical sharing of money is using the basis of audited accounts of 2013-2014, which was pegged at an ordinary revenue of 936 billion. But revenues since then to date have grown by 55% to 1.7 trillion shillings.
County government, they are losing about 700 billion that they are not getting a share from that particular revenue because audited accounts are not available from 2013 to 2014. So before we agree on this horizontal share, this issue must be sorted out.
Hakuna haja ya kupatia wale watu wako na ardhi kubwa sana na wao watu ni kidogo sana wapewe pesa mingi kuliko wale wako na ardhi kidogo na wako wengi wanafinyana. Tumesema hiyo formula lazima ibadilishwe, tupatie watu mali, tuachane na ardhi.
Now, British oil company Tullow Oil will resume its oil and gas development activities in Turkana County. A statement from the Ministry of Petroleum and Mining reveals that the government has reached an agreement with the company, and such includes addressing the grievances that stalled the transportation of the commodity to the coast. Some of the issues that the government has set sights on are about the insecurity that act locals, pushing them to the brink of hampering the execution of the project. The statement from Cabinet Secretary John Mosonic's office indicated that there is a plan to foster coexistence between the locals and the company. Area leaders, Turkana professionals and the business community also held a 2-day meeting in Lokicha to discuss the way forward. Tullow Oil withdrew from transporting 2,000 barrels of crude oil to the coast and cited harshness by the local community. And of course, I'd earlier shown you this particular editorial cartoon by Gado, and I'd mentioned there from my intro John Mosonica as a cabinet secretary, but that is John Muñoz, I should say. But this is what we were discussing about the stalemate. Yes, and let's just drill deeper on this with our panelists, and allow me to introduce them properly this morning because they just weighed in this morning. Yes, I'm holding court this morning with Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who is a former Deputy Chair of the African Union. Also, we do have with us Professor Noami Damba, the Vice Chancellor of KC University. Also, he is an expert on defense and foreign policy. We do have with us as well Irungu Houghton, who is Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. Also, we do have with us as well Dr. Mumon Zhao, who is a governance and security strategist, and Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is a conflict and resolution expert and national security analyst as well. Gentlemen, let's just begin in Turkana and this particular new development. Of course, yes, we can see this particular impasse, so to speak, has been broken. But the interface between the companies, the national or the county government and the locals, they seem to be, a confusion or a cloud of uncertainty as far as understanding of the memorandum of understanding goes. So it seems they have not fully addressed the issues with the locals there. And this is a waiting tinderbox if it's not really adequately addressed right now. Let's just begin with you, Ambassador Erastus Mwencha. I know we're not oil experts, and of course we're not from the county government sharing of revenue is concerned. But of course, you as Kenyans, you have the way of thinking of how this can be handled. What is your assessment so far? Because it seems, yes, this is just from the cabinet secretary and the company, but the locals, as far as that is concerned, insecurity surrounding it, and the memorandum of understanding that they claim has not been adequately addressed.
Maybe I can start with thank you, Debarl, a global perspective, because if you look at regions where you have some of these huge extractive industries, whether it is oil or copper or diamond, the locality is normally left impoverished, and there's been a lot of agitation globally that there must be some revenue sharing mechanism that takes into account the local communities, because there are of course side effects of the presence of such industries. First, environmental aspect, and then there is also an aspect of extending benefits to local people, particularly employment and the rest. I think it's important in such a situation, and I think the government is going the right way to make sure that the national government, the county reach agreement, but also the local mwananchi also has a stake. What I'm not sure is what is depicted in that cartoon. Wanjiku seems to be kind of in the periphery. And I think the county government must then sit down and make sure that, because they really are the vehicle through which we can have the people of Turkana feel participating in this venture, so that there is harmony. Because otherwise, you can end up with the situation that what we have seen in Nigeria or other parts where local communities, if they feel disadvantaged, then they create a problem like what is happening now.
Okay, Naomi Damba.
Debarl, I feel really very, very concerned about this development, because for me, number one, it is a strategy that we have created. I was involved on this project right from the beginning. By alerting the Turkana people that let's develop capacity for Turkana. And we brought in Professor Julian from University of Trinidad. Trinidad is the only black country that has been able to extract their oil and gas and distribute it without any help from outside. And they have experts, and so we brought them in. We talked to the governor, we talked to the people of Turkana. We were able to set the ground such that we train Turkana people by the time that this exploration reaches the distribution stage, so they can take over. But unfortunately, too low, I don't know what happened, and all others are deep involved. There is absolute no reason. I understand experts and all those kind of people, but there is absolutely no reason to bring drivers, truck drivers from Europe and all other people that we don't need in order to distribute the oil. So they take it, they control it, they distribute it, they do everything, and the people of Turkana are standing by and watching. Now, just remember what happened in Delta area in Nigeria. And compared to the Norway, that have saved their oil for future generation to come. They've done it right. And Africans need to learn. We need to learn on our own natural resources and what to do with.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a whole debate that on the national revenue or national, what do you normally call it, resources governance in this country, that we need to have a very serious, robust talk on that particular debate on how we can govern this, because I think there's a lot of loose ends that needs to be tied. Erongo Houghton, let's hear from you.
I think maybe three things very quickly. One is Simon Sinek has written a book called Leaders Eat Last. And I think for me, what I remember the book looking at this cartoon, because essentially what that is, you know, it's our turn to eat. And actually there's a chain of eaters. And of course the trickle down really is actually the primary beneficiary, or should be the primary beneficiary of oil reserves. So the first thing is just how leadership is manipulating the resources in a way in which we are not able to make the transformation in Turkana that is required. Turkana is one of our poorest counties. I mean, it has an average poverty rate of 94%, which compares to 45% for the rest of the country generally.
Yes.
So it is the poorest county, or one of the poorest counties in the country. The third thing really relates to the an article that's in the today, that's in the Business Daily, that speaks about the it's on the front page, page 19, where it says for one of the first times, foreigners now own the majority of shares within our national stock exchange. And I think we need to look at this question from two perspectives. One is, will the oil revenues bring a difference to the majority of people who live in poverty in that part of the country? And secondly, is this you know, another example of how we are giving away our resources and our wealth to non-Kenyan interests?
All right, thank you very much. Let's hear from Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, our colleague from Amnesty has asked a question: will the oil revenues bring a change in the lifestyle or the level of development for the people in Turkana? And I'm afraid to say no. No, if the way things are done, licensing, sharing of revenue, and the actual use of the revenue by the county government is not going to change. As long as corruption is going to continue, Debarl, then we shouldn't expect much. And this is why we see a lot of conflicts in African countries that are rich in resource. And people have always asked, what's the difference between, why is it that conflicts in Africa are caused by our own resources? And the answer is the management of those resources. And we compare, say, Nigeria and Norway. Why is it, Nigeria, by the way, produces more oil than Norway. Why is it that Nigeria is in such a shocking state? It's because of the way it's managing its oil resources, Debarl. The reason why Norway, with its less oil, is much more ahead is just it's managing its oil resources better. When I talk about corruption, Debarl, this is real.
Yes.
The ongoing demolitions in Nairobi, while we support a clearing of rivers, road reserves and all that, you will be surprised that the same NEMA that is demolishing some of the buildings on Riparian River is the same NEMA that licensed those buildings after being paid some kickbacks. So we're going back.
Yeah.
We're making 2 steps forward, 10 backward. And if this is the way, with all the corruption that we're going to deal with the resources in the country, then we have to say this, unfortunately, that what is happening in the Delta region in Nigeria is going to happen in Turkana and other parts of the country. God forbid, but the government and those who are given the tasks to address these issues should be clean.
They should be clean. Right, thank you. Dr. Momunzao.
Very well. Debarl, there are 3 theories about management of resources. This is a governance issue. It's also a human rights issue.
Yes.
And scholars say that how policies flow, the flow of policy is determined by groups. So you can look at an issue like the oil exploration and extraction in Turkana, and you look at which are the groups that are laying claim, that are beneficiaries and so on. The other one is the elite theory. And the elite theory says that in society you have a few organized people who control the rest of the group, and they lead the way. They show them what to do and so on. And the last one is what we call the rational choice theory. We have oil here. Does the country have the capacity to extract it, to exploit, to do all that? So you need to look at gains in terms of whether they are relative or absolute. Now, the thing is, why am I saying all these things? If you have good leadership, and also people who trust in their leadership, and there is good communication back and forth, and forthrightness, then it is possible to make concessions, to draw concessions, because we may not have the know-how or the critical resources that are needed to extract. Remember, this phase itself was exploratory. Up to where it is right now, it's still within the exploratory phase. And already people are talking about benefits that they want directly. So I think there's a lot of need for communication, for openness, for people to be shown this is where it all goes. There's a scholar called Michael Ross who said, does oil cause conflict? Now, if you take scientifically, you say this cup, okay, this is oil. Oil, you're here. Oil cause conflict. It's not possible. It is about how people view those resources, how they, like Dr. Mustafa was talking about the management and so on. And really, the raison d'etat, you know, why do you want something? What do you want to make of it? So what do you want to make of it? So I think there are things here that point to fundamental questions, but as well circumstantial issues in terms of and procedure, because there are people probably in Turkana who are looking at where we want the benefits of the oil right now. Right now. And probably the communication is not being done well to tell them this is how much has been put into the exploration. This is the much that governments have agreed, and in absolute terms, this is what we would gain, and this is what we would take home, and this is what the investors will take, and so on. If all those things are done in clarity, with a lot of transparency and accountability, then they need not be a source of conflict at all. You know, so it is upon the authorities, the national government, county government, and local community leaders to moderate these group interests and to bring out the concessionary nitty-gritties and translate them and convey them to the people in a way that they can understand.
Of course, and we can also look at the ramifications of this impasse, because now we are talking about $1 billion shillings that has been lost because of you know, the impasse that has been there. But still, they have pertinent issues that they are asking for. They want security, first of all, and we seem, as I've mentioned, this memorandum of understanding is not with the community, because you're talking about communication, and it seems there's a dearth of, you know, adequate, also sufficient communications between the government and the community. Because if they are not really addressing the issues on the ground, then it seems this will persist. Maybe this is just a band-aid solution that we see right now, but moving forward, still they'll want the demands on security, they want the demands on jobs as well, and they want the demands on the revenue that is coming also from the oil itself. So on a broader perspective, as we're winding up on this as well, it is costly not to transport, because still these particular companies have to pay their workers as well. And as I've mentioned, 1 billion shillings now is just going down the tubes. Any of you can pick up on this?
Debarl, I just finished reading a book called The Next Africa.
The Next Africa?
Yes, which is by Jake Bright and Aubrey. They talk about the powerhouse. Africa is the next powerhouse. We've been talking about Africa as the next generation, Africa as what have you. But this is real, because these people have spent years in Africa as consultants. They are 2 Americans. Their phones is ringing off the hook right now. Every single person around the world wants to come to Africa. It's in Africa where you make, for any investment, more than 10% of your investment.
Yes.
And therefore, what is happening is we're just beginning to discover Africa. Africa is just beginning to take place. And unless we are serious about addressing the issues of government, capacities training, security, then we are going to still have Maasai beating up Chinese with rungus, unless their fundamental communication which need to take place, their fundamental training, capacity training, which need to take place in the thing. And then on the issue of governance, we need to have thorough understanding the role of the national government, the role of the county, the role of the local people, and what is it that foreign investors can do to our country. And we need to be sophisticated about this. Otherwise, tragedy waiting to happen.
All right, tragedy awaits. Let's hear from Momonzao. Then we finally wrap up on the Turkana well.
Yeah, because Debarl, one Fieron, John Fieron, who said that conflict, anywhere you see conflict, there is a communicational problem and there is a commitment problem. People make, you know, they sign agreements or they make concessions. There is need to build trust and communication and follow up through those issues. Once that is done, if people are communicating well, and there is that commitment building and, you know, building of resolve around the issues, then there need not be this kind of confrontation. Because it is basic for people, the ordinary person down in Turkana, to understand, you know, where the whole thing goes in, how much has been put in, what it means, at what stage the entire concessionary arrangement is, and where the real benefits will start to be seen. I mean, Kenya is not even selling this oil yet as such. So we need to be careful how we set the mind frames of our people, because there's a lot of hype. That's why people are saying, okay, we want security, we want these jobs, we want all these, but it has to be, everything has to be put on the table in a way, and I think all they need to be done is to explain to them properly what is going on. And there are things that are obvious. I mean, why should you have a truck driver from outside if that is, those are basic things. But over and above that, in terms of the real benefits accruing from what would say now, this is the Kenyan share, this is what belongs to Turkana out of all that has been invested in this grand project, then people are clear which way to go. And therefore, that fuzzy, blurred atmosphere around that, if it is not well handled, then miscommunication comes in and conflict sets in, and we cannot allow that.
We cannot allow that. Thank you. And I just want to also ask you to head over to our Twitter handle for reactions there. If you have any sentiment on that, I can see some of them. Just to read one or two from Governor the Dreamer is saying, peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of creative alternatives for responding to conflict, alternatives to passive or aggressive responses, alternatives to violence. Also, we have Tash Tush. He says, totally concur with Professor Noah, and basically this picture, that is this picture, he says, will summarize what Prof is saying. And you can see the farmer. Then the common man is carrying, or the farmer is carrying the common man is carrying the businessman, and the politician is on top there as well. Then we have Jacob Abere Mtalala saying the cartoon speaks a lot. Looking at it closely, it signifies that some eager leaders have conflict of interest and don't want peace in South Sudan. That is what Jacob is thinking about, what we were earlier discussing on South Sudan. Also, it goes on to say that I'm justified about this argument. All in Turkana land and other areas need civil education and infrastructure development. So whatever they call crude oil export as of now, ni hasara tupu, according to him. Then we have Dikush is asking, where is the comprehensive social development plan? I understand that a contingent from Turkana went to Edmonton to benchmark how the First Nations, people in Canada gained from their resources. Then, he's asking then. So we have a lot of this benchmarking, but when it comes to comprehensive, of course, implementation of them, that is a different kettle of fish altogether. Let's see what is happening internationally. The U.S. ambassador joined a ceremony in Nairobi to commemorate 20 years since truck bombs hit the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 258 people and marking the start of Al-Qaeda's global campaign of violence. Some 200 Kenyans and Americans, many of them survivors of the attack, gathered at Nairobi's August 7th Memorial Park to pray and remember the victims whose names were read out during the candlelit ceremony. The blast killed 12 Americans and wounded several thousands of people in what was Al-Qaeda's first big attack, accompanied by the Islamist militants. 3 years later, the group will conduct its most notorious attack, flying passenger planes into New York's World Trade Center and the Pentagon, killing some 3,000 people. Kenyan troops are fighting in neighboring Somalia against Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda affiliate, as part of an African Union peacekeeping force that has been deployed there for more than a decade. Let's just listen in to what was happening yesterday.
Peter Njoroge Ndungu.
Terrorists really sought to divide us. They sought to divide Kenyans and Americans. They sought to attack civilization, and they failed. And we will not be beaten. We are going to continue to stand together with our friends here in Kenya. We are going to ultimately defeat people who traffic in death and destruction.
Photos I saw showed that this was a terrible, horrible sight. Now, for it to be transformed into something this beautiful, to me it's a ray of hope that even bad things can eventually be transformed to be good. So it's a projection of hope and determination.
I lost my son and I feel very bitter about it. 20 years down the line, we have not been compensated for the death or for the injuries. Those people are not working in the American embassy. So we are still praying for that compensation.
Well, such a bracing, sobering reminder about, the transnational threat about terrorism. And also in Tanzania, they were commemorating that also 20 years down the line. And we can see here Tanzania, US mark 20th anniversary of embassy bombing. This is The Citizen, the publication of Nation Media in Tanzania. And here we can see also Home Affairs Minister Kangi Lugola and acting U.S. Ambassador Inmi Patterson laying a wreath at the monument commemorating victims of the U.S. embassy bombing in Dar es Salaam on August 7th, 1998. Yesterday's solemn ceremony at the National Museum in Dar, marking the 20th anniversary of the attack, was attended by relatives of those killed in the blast, just as we saw it also here in Nairobi. And I want to show you also what Stano has drawn for us today. Aside from commemorating, many are asking, how can we be compensated? And this is how it looks today, all right? Many are caught up in that web, or that is maybe depicting how this has been a long, protracted time since the blast, but compensation still is a mirage, far away. Right, 1998 blast victims, 20 years on and still waiting for justice. Let's hear, when you talk about justice, of course, Amnesty International will be spot on to tell us more about justice of this. And I don't know how you're putting tails on this particular story, because I think along the years it has tapered off and many people have not been compensated. Many of them are maimed, so some of them are blind right now. Some of them lost their limbs. Some of them, of course, they lost loved ones as well, and you can see, yeah, it was a weepy, teary moment even yesterday. But in terms of tracking this compensation, where are we so far?
I think there are a number of things. One is, when I think back about 20 years ago, this was really the wake-up call that the world was changing for this region. And this attack on our soil, but also in Dar es Salaam, if we think back to that point, we should have really been present to the fact that things were about to become very different in terms of national security issues. Since then, of course, we've seen a number of attacks. I think the point at which it began, there was a crescendo was really in 2014, where we saw a number of attacks that hit the capital, including the attacks on Westgate and later on Garissa University and so on. So I think there are two things. One is really thinking more about our national security strategy and whether we are essentially turning the corner on the war against terror, which has been there. The second one, I think, is really the question of what happens to victims that are that suffer either death or harm as a result of terrorist bombings or attacks, and what happens to their calls for compensation. In 2015, the president stood before the country and talked about a restitution fund, and this was linked to the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation report. I'm present now, 3 years on, really, that we've not seen either the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation report implemented, nor have we seen the restoration, the fund be operational. So it seems that we're still very far from a mechanism that allows for the state not only to keep people safe, but also to compensate where necessary. But I think, in 2018, the last thing I think for me is that, in 2015, we had this conversation about are our constitutional freedoms hampering the capacity of our security forces to be able to crack down on terror. What's interesting for me now is that we no longer have that conversation. In fact, we actually argue that the reason why we fight against terrorists is to protect the very constitutional freedoms that we have. And I think that's been a major breakthrough in terms of our national security threat. And of course, despite the continued attacks on our security forces on the border with Somalia, which seem to be either monthly or every second month, we have seen a de-escalation of these attacks and the impact on civilians. So I think in some ways, looking back, we have turned the corner, I think, a very dangerous corner that we saw begin 20 years ago.
Right. Let's hear from Mumunzao. We can take also an international scale because Erastus, let's just hear from Erastus in terms of strategy, first of all. Because I know we have the counter-terrorism, the counter-violence extremism strategy that was actually launched, I think, 5 years ago. And that has to be revised according to the National Counter-terrorism unit so far. I don't know if maybe you're privy to this. You can actually just give us a highlight of what is happening from that particular front, Erastus?
Okay.
Or Mustafa, any of you who has this particular
I think Mustafa
information
is very much also attuned to it. But let me build on what Irungu was saying before I say something on that, particularly the international aspect.
Before because we need to take a short break, so just pick one, then we can continue on the other side of the break.
Okay.
Please.
Well, the part I wanted to add to is, of course, international terrorism is a global phenomenon and a menace. And it can only be tackled if there is international cooperation. And that's where this counter-terrorism comes in, because one of the things that has always been a problem is sharing information, but also having that global ownership. In fact, to add insult to injury, for countries like Kenya, when we had all this terrorism like Westgate, then you find the Western countries giving advice that don't go to Kenya. That is really an insult to a country that is being attacked because of being seen to be an ally to the West. And beyond that, when it comes to compensation, that is, the international community has remained aloof, and yet it is their businesses that were targeted, the embassies that were targeted. And so we must have that cooperation. And so the international, the counter-terrorism, one of the key components of it is, of course, to try and understand and share information on terrorism, but also on the technology that is being deployed. Because, as Irungu says, the scenario is changing on a daily basis.
I'm sorry to butt in. We need to take a short break right now at 7 on the nose. On the other side of the break, we want to see, yes, from that particular bombing, we can see also the tactics of the terrorists have changed from a low-scale, sort of high-impact sort of a strategy they use nowadays. We want to see How are they morphing? And are we keeping up with the strategies or with their tactics so far as strategy is concerned? That is on the other side of a break. Don't go away. Much more coming up on the other side of a break. Don't go away. And of course, you can head over to our Twitter handle, AM Live NTV is our Twitter handle, AM Live NTV. Also our profile name on Facebook. Give us a thumbs up there, and 20680 is our SMS bottle. We shall read some of your reactions on the other side of the break as well.
or government should develop a mechanism under which the innocent victims are not left, in this kind of boundary like what we have seen in Kenya. Now, the Counter-terrorism Center that has been set up by the African Union is based in Nigeria and works very closely. And I would rather that I have Mustafa comment, because this is one of his best areas, and rather than take the thunder away from him, let him comment on it.
So it is based in Algeria?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So they complement with also the counter-terrorism centers that we have
then
across.
Then you work with the national levels and you share information.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, Debarl, I have been to that center in Algiers when Ambassador Madeira was the director there. I was there twice, thrice as a resource person. First of all, with regard to our own the national strategy, I think there is need for a recalibration of that particular strategy to now respond to the emerging issues. With regard to 1998 and 2018, it's 20 years on, and what has changed? And what has changed, Debarl, is then in 1998, Kenya was a secondary target. Kenya was not being targeted by Al-Qaeda. It was the US interest, the Israeli interest. But from 2011, 2012 on, Kenya has now become a primary target. So the terrorists are targeting Kenya as a primary target. They are not just looking for the Israeli or the US targets. And therefore, the strategy that we need to put in place is that responds to Kenya as a primary target. I must say the security agencies have done very well until today, especially from 2014 onwards. We've seen less attacks, the challenges being contained. We need to do more in the countering violent extremism, more education. And I must say also, Debarl, that I think when Kenya stood with the West when they were being targeted in 1998, we need to see more of this. The West will need to stand with Kenya and assist Kenya in fighting terrorism and violent extremism.
Right, let's hear from Professor Nomidamba. Briefly.
Debarl, just repeat a few things Mustafa just said. Yes, what have we learned after 20 years? Large-scale incident of attack has diminished. Our intelligence have got better. We as a nation is much better prepared than we were 20 years ago. But now there is a very recurring problem, particularly in Kenya and the rest, and I call it warthog mentality. Warthog mentality, where you hit and forget. Yes, you continue.
That's how a warthog reacts.
Warthog reacts. And so we need to re-energize, we need to refocus, we need to, if you are in Israel, they are alert 24 hours. And we need to know that this kind of attack or this kind of thing is going to happen at some time in the future if we retreat back.
All right, thank you. Let's just wind up on it with you. You have something?
Yes.
Before we took a short break, actually, I was alluding to the fact that tactics have changed. I want us just to address that.
Okay.
That there's a low impact.
That's right.
Not really a low impact, but a low scale, high impact sort of strategy that we can see from this. Could we just address that briefly and how it has morphed since 1998 to now?
Yeah, we call that the repertoire of terror.
The repertoire of terror.
The repertoire, the ways that terrorists use to attack or to manifest their skills. You know, it's a bit of a mixture, but when you see the kind of lone wolf tactic, for example, where you have small sleeper cells and then they manifest, and then you have bizarre kind of attacks like we had in Nice, you know, someone just plowing into a crowd with with a truck and so on.
Knives as well.
Yeah, it means the space is constricted. And one thing that is happening is that, especially with Kenya vis-a-vis the international system, is that there's general agreement world over that any violent extremist, the terrorist, is just one of those It's not just Islamic extremism, but all manner. You can see where they attack Rohingya Muslims and so on. All these are extremists. And there's that general feeling that we are dealing with an enemy of humanity, hosti humani generis. Number two is that since over the last 20 years, we had the whole idea of just tactics in terms of counter-terrorism, you know, fighting the terrorist and bringing the terrorists down. But with time, we are now talking about countering the extremism and preventing the extremism. That's the whole discourse, and it's helping because people are understanding more what is happening. I mean, in 1998, people just didn't understand what's going on and why all this. But you can tell now that the general populace, not only in Kenya but around the world, they know we have a common problem and so on. And in the same breath, Debarl, we should have perhaps a United Nations fund for amelioration of terror issues. For example, where victims can be compensated from a pool of funding, where countries can be you know, given some share.
Thank you.
Depending on the kind of problems they face over time and space.
Right. There's a lot of ground to cover. And of course, we want to see also what is happening in South Sudan with that particular deal as well. How fragile is it? And we do know that the conflict parties have signed a deal, which they say is a final deal, so to speak. South Sudan's conflicting parties have signed a final deal in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, on power sharing and security arrangements, but there is still concerns that the deal won't solve all problems and may soon be unraveled. The deal reached through the talks brokered by the Sudanese government with a mandate by the Intergovernment or Governmental Authority on Development in Africa was signed by South Sudanese President Salva Kiir, major opposition leader Riek Machar, and representatives of other South Sudanese opposition factions. Sudanese Foreign Minister Al-Diridiri Mohamed Ahmed said at the signing ceremony that all the South Sudanese parties and political forces signed on the agreement on power sharing and security arrangements in South Sudan. He commended the stances of all parties and their commitment to the ceasefire in South Sudan even before the beginning of the talks, expecting that all the parties will be committed to the signed deal. But an expert worries that the deal does not solve all the problems, particularly revenue sharing and security arrangements, and may affect the peace progress. On July 25th, the South Sudanese conflicting parties signed an initial deal of power sharing and governance prior to the final document of a deal on Sunday. The initial agreement stipulated that the South Sudanese president will continue to serve as president of Sudan during transitional period, while the opposition leader will assume the position of first vice president. There will be 4 vice presidents from different political parties. Under the agreement, the transitional cabinet will be composed of 35 ministers from both the government and the opposition, including 20 ministers from the government and 9 from the Machar-led Sudan's People's Liberation Movement in opposition. The deal further stipulated a transitional national legislative body composed of 550 members and 332 from the government and 120 from the SPLM-IO. South Sudan has been witnessing a civil war since December 2013, and which has left about 10,000 dead and millions of others displaced. So this is what we want to discuss this morning as well with our panelists here. And I just want also to lift this particular editorial cartoon that we do have here in the Star today, according to Victor, South Sudan power sharing deal. And of course, we discussed this largely with our panelists. Let's just begin on it. This particular development in South Sudan, maybe you can bring us up to speed, Irungu Houghton, first of all, we are happy that there's a deal, but also we are not happy that one of our panelists is still in the slumbers. I thought this would have been part of a deal. The handshake.
No, despite
that is Peter Biaraja.
I think it was tens of American senators and diplomats in Juba called for Peter's release last week. And
yes.
It was a welcome development. I think the petition is now in the range of about 4,000 people who are calling for his release. So I think there is a bittersweetness, I think, for some of us in terms of discussing this issue, that Peter is still
yes.
incarcerated, and it's now 11 days. In fact, I respect Nation Media Group too much, but I was going to actually hand out these statements here because I think this is really what the panelists should be holding up for
Let me see it again. Just lift it so that we can please.
It's 11 days since Peter was arrested and currently is in detention without trial in the Blue House, as it's called. So there are a number of things. I think, first of all, we can welcome the agreement. Obviously, it is very limited. It's a power-sharing agreement. It doesn't deal with the separation of powers from the central government and the regions. It also doesn't dismantle the securitization that has happened. So the National Security Act, for example, is not abandoned at this point. And that's the act that the South Sudanese government is using to hold Peter and a number of other political prisoners. I think the third real area that we need to be worried about is the proliferation of militia. That over the last 5.5 years, we've seen thousands of people lose their lives, but we've also seen a lot of citizens become quite militarized and weaponized. And we fear for the peace agreement in the context of this not being taking place. And the last one really is that any peace agreement really should give space for building the system or the culture of public accountability. So if women's groups, civil society organizations, media, and others are not able to open up the democratic space to have an open debate about the future of South Sudan, then I think we have to be concerned. So I think that's where the leadership should move to now, which is to free the society to be able to non-violently and democratically discuss the future of some of the big topics that are on the table.
All right, so we want to just see also how fragile is this particular peace agreement, because it seems from the humanitarian perspective as well, that is truly one thing that has been captured, and according to some of the analysts that also we alluded to from this particular story. But looking at the cabinet, we have a bloated cabinet, and I think this is what Peter Biara-Jack was really alluding to. And maybe we can just get a snippet of what he said here on the show as a precursor to what we're discussing today, and this now has actually come to bear in South Sudan with the deal as well. Let's just get that particular bite from Peter Biara-Jack, who was here, I think, last month to talk about this particular power-sharing deal.
The whole concept is about power sharing. It's about dividing up the cake. This is what it has really essentially come down. So what IGAD is proposing is that the transitional government of national unity, this is Salva Kiir, Taban Dengai, and the group that is in Juba, including some of the political parties that are allied to the government, those of Martin Inea, as a transitional government of national unity and the parties allied to them in Juba, they will get 60% of all the cabinet positions. All right? And then it says the SPLMIO, this is the group of Riek Machar now. Riek Machar will get 25%. This is what the IGAD is proposing for them. This is for the SPLMIO here. And then you have another new entities that has emerged, a number of different smaller armed groups, including Paul Malong group that joined not so long ago. This group, they call themselves South Sudan Opposition Alliance. They're proposing to give them 10%. Then there is a group of former political detainees. This is the group of former Secretary General Pagana Mom, former Foreign Minister Denga Lor, and others. They will be getting 5%. Then there is also another group where they have another opposition entity. So essentially what this thing is, what IGAD is doing here is saying, let's divide up the cake. And based on the positioning on the ground, based on the political clout, based on the different positions and arguments that they have reached, this will be the sharing of the cake. Now, they're proposing a cabinet of 42 ministers. This is a country that is extremely poor now, where soldiers have been going for months without getting salaries, where inflation is among the highest in the world. Yet IGAD is coming here to say that the cabinet is going to be increased from the present 32 cabinet ministers by another 10 ministers to 42. They are also proposing to increase the parliament from 400. Now, our parliament was only 332 MPs. And then in the last agreement, IGAD increased it to 400. And now they are proposing to increase it to 440. They are also proposing that we have 3 vice presidents. So you have a first vice president, which will be appointed by the group of Riek Machar, the SPLMIO. You have a vice president that will be appointed by the government. And then you have a third vice president that will be appointed by a coalition of other opposition entities. So 3 vice presidents, 42 cabinet ministers, 440 MPs. This is the breakdown of the numbers of what IGAD is proposing. And this is at a time when the economy of South Sudan is extremely in tatters, where basically people have gone for months without getting their salaries, where basic products are very difficult to get. And we were talking about bodyguards before. And this is a country where if you are a minister, you are entitled a house, you are entitled a fleet, you are entitled vehicles and all sort of things. So essentially, most of our budget, the entire resources of the country, will be going to maintain these political leaders and their generals. This is the other part. There is a security arrangement where all of these guys in the bush that have declared themselves generals, and there is something of like 15 different rebel groups, and each one of them put on ranks, will be integrated into the army. So already now, as we speak, we have over 1,000 generals. It's likely that they may increase, I don't know, to, I don't know, 200, we get new 200, maybe 300, I don't know. This is essentially what IGAD is proposing.
And of course, we've seen that number has really gone up there. According to the current figures that we do have, we have 4 vice presidents. He was saying they will have 3. So the concern of Peter Biarajak, of course, was put out there. And this, I think, also really ruffled the feathers of the Sudanese authorities as well. Let's just begin from and discuss this particular blotted government and what he says. We know the economy of South Sudan right now. It has been, you know, ground to a halt as far as peace is concerned. Nothing has been flourishing so that they can actually talk about robustly growing their economy exponentially. Could we just discuss a bit of it about the blotted? And this was his concern, and it has really now shaken into place. I don't know, Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, briefly. Because this is from IGAD, and you were then also the former chair, deputy chair of the African Union.
Yeah, Debarl, I think, well, let me start with the positive note that when the president said at the signing ceremony that, well, this time the peace would work, accord would work because it's consensual. The last time it was kind of pushed into it. It's very good news to hear him say that. But I still see his interest is very big. One, there is, I think, one group that has split. They have not even signed, or they have denounced this peace accord before even the ink could dry. And so, and the basis of which that they don't agree with power sharing, which you are asking, meaning that they want more positions to be given, because the very basis of creating this unity government is based on what is on the ground. If you have a militia, you have a controlling a territory, you are entitled to a position.
Yes.
So you are in a dilemma. The more the country is divided, the more it's going to be. But, and again, the president's interest is full now, because as he moves in, one of the things that they should tackle is what Irungu was mentioning, security sector. Because in the last agreement, that was never dealt with properly. You still had Riek Machar with his army intact. You had the government on one side, and they never were fully integrated. And that is how they ended up shooting each other, and hell broke loose. So the first area that they should tackle now is integrated. Of course, have a plotted army, but at least have one commander, because building a nation state where you have all these commanders is not viable. Then, of course, there is the aspect of the plotted, but the economy. You have refugees, over 4 million people are either displaced or out of the country, and they need humanitarian assistance. Yet, you don't have resources to address all that. On the bright side, the oil fields can now be switched on. Oil can start flowing. With the sanctions, the American sanctions, the oil prices are likely to remain high, so there could be a revenue stream coming in. I think they should move quickly, first of all, to make sure that you start giving basic services to the people, because the people are hurting. People need to be settled. They can go back to their farms.
Thank you. Right, let's hear from Mumunza. Will this hold?
Yes,
very briefly.
Yeah, I would like us to tread carefully and with caution. One thing is South Sudan is a friendly state, is our friend, and there is a way governments address each other. And Irongo Houghton here is doing what he's supposed to do, because he's a lobbyist. He has to, you know, talk about human rights and all that, and that's the way it should be. But again, there are other channels where governments talk to each other and how they approach each other, and there are ways through which advice can be across so that some of these things are handled. And at the level at which South Sudan is as a political system, is not still, you know, at the continuum of democracy, liberty, and all that is still not at the level where it should be. So there are things which we may be asking from them that they're probably not able to deliver, and we need to be cautious about that. There's one scholar called Stephen Stedman and Rothschild who asked, why do peace agreements fail? And peace agreements sometimes fail because, of course, commitment, communication, and what we call core values, you know, things that set the people who are involved in the conflict value. Again, there's the question about what makes the peace to succeed once you build it. Now, one scholar called Doyle said, Doyle and Sambanis, they said that you have three things. What we call local capacity. Then there is the ferocity of the conflict. How far has that gone in? And the commitment of the international community. So you have three things: the international community, right, the how far the conflict is, and the local capacities.
Thank you.
And then Sudan, South Sudan, is challenged in certain fundamental ways in those fronts. The international community, like IGAD, is trying, you know, to as much as it could, but we need a little bit of more analysis and moderation to help these governments and stakeholders to communicate better.
Right, good points. But what if the international community has vested interests as well? Yeah, that would be also a tripping wire for the peace process itself.
That's part of the whole game. You see, sometimes people who are external to the conflict can make it worse, or you know, abate, or, you know, make it to succeed.
Thank you. So, let's hear from Mustafa.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, just picking up from where Muma's left, Debarl, geopolitics. There's a lot to gain in war, by the way, financially. So there are those who do not wish the war to end. But let's congratulate Salva Kiir and Riek Machar for signing this peace agreement. And we wish them well. Having said this, my opinion remains the same, that the guns should go silent, and that Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, and I do hope that they have this wisdom to start finding ways to transfer power to a more youthful, not exactly youthful, but, you know, another set of leaders. Whether it still have to have those tribal dynamics so that the country can come together between the New Era and the Dinka, yeah, so be it. But that's what they should be doing. There are complexities in conflict, as Ambassador Mwencha is talking about. You know, the militias associated with the tribal gangs. You know, Paul Malong was not in this. Is not in this deal, and he still holds a large militia. And he was the head of the army for a very long time, and can complicate or spoil the peace deal. And lastly, Debarl, I think it's important also to use this podium to call for the release of Biar Ajak. I do not think, based on what he said, if that is what has put him in trouble, I do not think he's a threat to the security of South Sudan. And I think they can process some of these things even when he's out of jail.
Yeah, could they be also threatened by, you know, the young Turk? Because we see Dr. Peter Biar Ajak is a young man who is a sharp Turk as well. And they want to keep the status quo, right? So if there is this resurgence of young men who are educated, they're coming from diaspora, and they have a different view and perspective of how they want the country to be run. And we have these old coots who are warlords, you know, coming from the bushes, and they are still hanging there, even by the fingernails. They still want to be in power. And they've seen bloodshed has been in that country. It is fractured right now. And all we can see is just a band-aid solution. We have young, vibrant young men that have the solution. Why shouldn't they be given space? Professor Noamidamba.
Debarl, this is an irrational government put up in a desperate time for the convenience of warlords who've been in the bush. And all other people who are coming in. There has to be a rational and there has to be realignment and rethinking of in terms of leadership. Reorganize the renegade troops that are spread all over the country. Begin to gather the arms, small arms, that are available everywhere, and instill some discipline, create a national army and a national police, and then begin dealing with the burgeoning government which they have created, which is irrational, which is not going to help this country. And therefore, the point you are talking about, Debarl, is that there are hundreds, thousands of diaspora, South Sudanese diaspora in America, in Europe, Australia, elsewhere, that can come in and be infused in order to support and create capacity that will then develop the answer, deliver the answer for South Sudanese people.
Just one adage.
Let's just hear from We'll come to you.
So I think it's impossible to see the condition that South Sudan finds itself at the moment as anything else than an intergenerational conflict. Peter is not just one of the lost boys who managed to get to the US, who studied in Harvard and then managed to get a PhD at Cambridge University, is a thought leader, is able to inspire not just South Sudanese but also Kenyans, as he does many times when he's on this show. He's also the chairperson of the South Sudan Young Leaders Forum. So it's not really just an attack on Peter, it's really an attack on a generation of South Sudanese who have something more to offer than simply their knowledge of weapons or their knowledge of militias or their knowledge of armed conflict. And I think for me that's why it's so worrying that Peter remains in detention 11 days on, despite the progress that we've seen on the peace agreement. So I think for us, we have to continue to urge, if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials are listening to us right now, and I know that your show, Debarl, is watched by state officers as well as many, many citizens, we really need to be asking for them to not to be the last to call for Peter Bia's release. Many Americans have done it, many diplomats have done it. I'm not sure whether our representatives in Juba have actually made this representation, but my request as a Kenyan would be for them to do that.
And of course we have former diplomats here in the country as well who are in government of South Sudan. We know they're here in the country, and if they're watching still, we actually are pleading, yes, as of course our colleague here in the panel, I think he's been good in advocating, peace processes in South Sudan, and he should be given a table and a listening ear as well amongst the Council of Elders, so that if they're mapping out how South Sudan can come out from this morass, I think also that is a sharp tack that cannot be allowed just to go down the tubes like that. But we want to continue and see also Zimbabwe as well before we are strapped for time. And this, we know, also has been just a script that really ran like our country, a contentious election, opposition of course coming to the fore and saying it has been rigged, and some of them also police coming down on them, taken to the slummers as well. That has been a contentious election as well. And Zimbabwe court right now has freed on bail 27 opposition supporters arrested by police last week on accusation of fomenting a post-election violence. Magistrate Francis Vittorini granted $50 bail to each of the Movement for Democratic Change members. that Zimbabwe Police Chief spokesperson, Senior Assistant Commissioner Charity Charamba, was quoted by the Daily Mail saying the Zimbabwean Republic Police is keen to interview Silas Jakakimba, a Kenyan national, in connection with this disturbance which occurred in a rally on August the 1st. He asked citizens to inform police of Jakakimba's whereabouts. Any of you can comment on these skirmishes as well? I can see some of you now getting gun shy too.
Well,
yes.
Well, I don't know about you know, that person. I don't know him, but what I want to say is that systems don't change radically. There's a scholar called Boash who said that in every system you have like an old guard, you know, like what you would call then you have, you know, regime ancient, and then you have the people who are sort of progressive. And sometimes when the regime ancient is pushed to the wall, the repercussions can be. So systems don't change. If you shock a system, then there will be repercussions. So what I'm saying is that we don't want we cannot force Zimbabwe to move at a pace, you know, because it evolves. A political system evolves over time, yes, and there are certain qualities it must have. We need to help them to build democratic institutions. They are still at, you know, what you would call the nascent stage of a democratic transition. And they need structures in place, institutions, and then they have to nurture them.
But we're talking about Zimbabwe. Over the years, we had all these institutions.
Yeah.
So were we observing a sort of a pseudo-democracy? Right now,
it's electoral. Sometimes it is not exactly what it is. Elections are not enough to pass that there is a democracy, and so on. There are a lot of qualities. You need a supporting national culture, democratic culture that Irungu Houghton was pointing to.
Okay.
And in order for those institutions to work.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember back, so 1985, I was a little younger than I am now. I was in Zimbabwe and began to see the signs of a one-party state, not de facto, you know, not de jure, but not legally. Instead, but the beginnings of really a autocratic culture. And we saw the killings in Matabeleland, which were kind of covered over for many years. In 1988, I remember being at the University of Zimbabwe and students handing out a leaflet that had at the top, "Not yet Uhuru." And I remember thinking how interesting that was. And many of the students had read Jaramogi's book and were now using it in the Zimbabwean context. So I think the seeds of, I guess, what you call the democratic decline can go back many, many, many years. But I think, having said that, what's really important, and just with a light touch, technical assistance across countries is not a bad thing, generally. I won't comment on this case of Silas until proven, but I think, you know, at a time like this, you know, Kenyans that are offering technical assistance to countries in the region really should be offering assistance that it creates the sense of non-violence, that creates the sense of democratic stability, and not, I guess, what you'd call polarize in a violent manner these issues. The other thing that, and maybe just from a point of urgency, I just would like us to return a little bit to some breaking news this morning. Many of us 3 weeks ago talked about the evictions.
You need to run it by me before it's breaking.
I would like to, the breaking news, which I'm about to break here, is the coming down of the South End Mall at the end of Bagathi Road, which is happening as we speak now. It's coming down. It's coming down.
There when I've and they were obstructing the traffic.
And two weeks ago, you know, many of us were very concerned, and maybe many of the viewers saw a number of people speaking very publicly about the demolition of homes in Kibra and then Kaloleni and Makongeni and other places. And we've probably lost about 3,000 households in the space of the last fortnight. Now, most of that was done essentially to complete roads or to essentially decongest the areas next to the railways. And let's come back to Nzao, who says, who called on me a little bit as an activist and says, you know, that this is my job, I'm paid to do this, and it's really important. What is not often seen is that many of us actually tried to reach out to duty bearers. We tried to reach out to state officials to find out, is there another way in which we can, I guess, bring order to the city and also decongest certain areas? Very often we are not given audience, and this morning there is a march that has been organized by the Slum Dwellers Association, Muungano wa Wanavijiji, who have brought together over 105 village leaders to approach the Ministry of Transport, essentially to call for compensation and a resettlement plan for all those homes that we saw last week being demolished. And that's taking place at 9 o'clock this morning at Uhuru Park.
Thank you.
But I think the key thing for me is, how do we get a government that is able to be open so that it can listen to the views of citizens?
All right.
Not just on evictions issues, but even on elections. All
right. Just going off on Otsanya, let's hear from Professor Noami Damba. I know, and I hope you're not piggybacking on his comment about the demolition.
No,
okay, on Zimbabwe.
I'm focused on Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Debarl, one of the shocked Zimbabweans, the other day said that those tanks we celebrate last year in November being used against us today. Ian Smith said Africans will never be able to govern themselves. Ian Smith is no longer in the leadership in that country. The point is...
Who is Ian Smith?
Former Prime Minister.
Oh, former Prime Minister.
It's a good question, actually, at this point in time.
Former Prime Minister.
Into the annals of
former colonial Prime Minister.
Okay.
Who said we will never be able to govern themselves. I refuse, Debarl, to accept this thing about our debate begin with colonialists and end with colonialists. And that we are not ready, we need to build institutions. When are we going to be ready?
When will it be ready? I think it's a good question. Erastus Mwencha, you met President Mugabe.
Yes.
You've held court with President Mugabe. Have you called him to ask him, is he happy with the development right now?
Particularly given he voted for the party that he
I guess his own party.
Yeah. But Debarl, let's come to the current situation. And I wanted to really take off from where...
briefly, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's not be apologetic about the African situation to say that in Africa, democracy should be second-class type of democracy because we are not ready. Somebody is trying to write a book now, making a mockery of Africa, saying how to rig elections. And one of the things they're trying to say is the very things that we are seeing. I think, like Irungu was saying, we have moved from phases where we fought colonialism, we then established these one-party states. We are now moving into multi-party democracy, but we are trying to adjust.
Yes.
I think what's important in this venture now is to try and it's not rocket science. To try and bring this to the fore.
Yes.
And I don't think when we say in a form of criticism, you can be like a king where people say, who's going to tell the king that he's naked? All of us trying to say, okay, things are okay. But let's tell the king is naked. And the only way we can tell the king, let's improve, because each time people are dying, and yet it is only coming because of things that we can do. We can change.
Thank you. Right, we want to also focus a bit on what is happening in Malaysia and also on what is happening in Argentina right now. As far as corruption is concerned, just to bring it up to speed, Malaysia's embattled former Prime Minister Najib Razak will be charged today under Money Laundering Act, according to the anti-graft agency, in connection with a multi-billion-dollar scandal at the state fund One Malaysia Development Bahad. Najib, who is 65, and his family have faced of fighting corruption, what are we seeing in Argentina and Malaysia, in South Korea, and in Brazil? Do you think with the lifestyle audit right now, it will come down to this? Will we see people, high-profile figures being handcuffed and taken to the slummers? Is this the way that we should fight corruption? Briefly, as we're winding up, let's begin with you, Ambassador Mancha.
I am aware that KEPSA is now leading the church in terms of putting together a coalition of their willing, but also many formations of the country to launch a program for us from the private sector to contribute. And I think we must support that. What the president has started must be given full support. It must be given all the energy required, because if we don't fight this corruption, we'll live to regret, because our children and their children will find no space. You need to fly over this region to see what is happening. You need to see how the economy is now running down because of these entrepreneurs. So let's fight it.
Let's fight it. Noamidama, your closing remarks?
Debarl, we have incredible potential. In the book I quoted earlier, is talking about 200 million youth in Africa, and incredible resources, huge potential. And the book cited 4 countries: Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Rwanda as the leading force ahead of us.
30 seconds, sir.
But we cannot do it with this level of corruption, and corruption must not be one person fight. It is a war against all citizens of Kenya.
Thank you.
Debarl, I think the president is serious at this time in the war on corruption. One thing, and this is very important, that everybody that is involved in corruption should actually be taken to task. The NEMA officials that are now overseeing demolitions, that are very same officials that license these buildings to be built on riparian, are the ones who should be arrested and put to task about why they signed those plans. We demand that they are also arrested.
Thank you. Right. Let's hear from Dr. Mumunzao.
Yeah, I think I cannot, I have to, I cannot agree more with my fellow panelists that the head of state is right on course with it, and this has to happen.
Thank you.
And let us not have this tendency sometimes of wanting to have the cake and eating it at the same time.
Thank you.
We have to be truthful.
Finally.
So corruption is the face of a dysfunctional system. But actually the roots are abuse of office and impunity. And I think the important thing is, even as we begin to rectify what has happened in terms of people building on riparian reserves, we need to actually think about what are the causes that led to that. And I think Mustafa's point is a critical one. The second one is, we just need to encourage those, the extension of, I think it's in our newspapers today, in the Standard, there is a headline on lifestyle audit processes beginning to become more, broadly applied, but also more deeply applied, and I think we have to encourage that process. But until we see people in handcuffs, as you say, we are not going to believe that anything is really changing.
Thank you. Thank you for coming through. I just want to thank you, our panelists this morning, for that very insightful discussion this morning. But of course, we have to push on, do our bit where we can, and of course, we always say, an inch by an inch, life is a cinch, yard by a yard, life is hard. And we pray that the little that we do in this corner also cannot be replicated elsewhere. We have these conversations as well. But I'll be remiss if I don't really talk about Peter Biara-Jack, right? This is one of our panelists. You saw him. He's been really advocating for peace in South Sudan. Day 11, it's time to free Dr. Peter Biara-Jack now at Ajak Peter, and the hashtag is free Peter Biara-Jack. We shall be discussing over and over until he is actually released from the slummers. Thank you very much for your valued company. Living with Us is up next.